Well, thank you so much, Ken, and welcome to all of you, and thank you as well for so many elected officials being here. I just flew in from Manhattan. I did the Bill O'Reilly show last night and Fox and Friends this morning. And I must say, having been in Manhattan for a day and a half, it's so refreshing to be back here in Iowa. So beautiful. I've been here in all seasons, and Iowa's really lovely in the summer. One of the reputations I've gained since I declared my candidacy for the presidency on May 4th is I will kind of go anywhere and talk to anyone and do all kinds of interviews. And one of the interviews that I did recently was on The View. Not exactly our crowd, but you know, sometimes you have to go talk to people who disagree, and I bring this up for a very specific reason. And maybe halfway through the interview, one of their hosts, Rosie Perez, we were having a good conversation. I was actually having quite a fun time on The View. And she looked at me and she said, "You know, Carly, I'm not a Republican." I said, "Rosie, I'm shocked." She said, "I have to ask you a question. Why are you a conservative?" And you know, she said it in that tone that people get, you know, I kind of like you, why are you a conservative? And I said this. I said, I'm a conservative because I know no one of us is any better than any other one of us. All of us have God-given gifts. All of us can live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning. And I know our values, our principles, and our policies work better to lift people up. The audience applauded. She was sort of stunned by the answer. Now, why do I bring it up? Because I think one of the things that your elected representatives face every day, one of the things that we face as we contemplate a national election in 2016, it's not just about Republicans versus Democrats. It's not just about Hillary Clinton versus, let's say, Carly Fiorina. Go on, admit it, you'd love to see that. Right? I mean, you'd really love to see that, right? I actually think this election is a fight over whether conservative values, principles, and policies will guide this nation going forward, or left-wing progressive values and policies will. And I think that is of huge consequence. I think we have to reintroduce conservatism to the American people so that they know it applies and lifts everyone up, truly. And so I just want to talk very briefly about 3 issues where progressives demonstrate the left wing of the Democrat Party. And by the way, the energy in the Democrat Party is on the left now. We know that. 3 issues where it's so clear that progressives are prepared to sacrifice other people's lives and other people's livelihoods at the altar of their ideology. Let us start with education. I just came from New York City, as I mentioned to you. New York City, a place where the mayor campaigned by vowing that he would destroy charter schools and voucher programs and school choice. And moms walked across bridges to protest. And the moms were not from the Upper East Side. They were from low-income neighborhoods, African-American and Hispanic neighborhoods, and those moms, and in some cases dads, were walking across the bridges protesting because they knew if their mayor took away their choices as parents, they were taking away their children's chances. I'm reminded often of the head of the Chicago Public Teachers Union, who in the middle of a strike, the issue in Chicago a couple years ago was teacher accountability. In the middle of a strike, she took to the microphones and she said this: "We cannot be held accountable for the performance of children in our classrooms because too many of them are poor and come from broken families." Now, what do you suppose she was saying? That if you're poor and you come from a broken family, you can't learn. You don't have potential. You don't have gifts. You can't live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning. It's the height of disrespect and disregard. Or think for a moment about the outrage of this latest Planned Parenthood videotape. I have been very vocal on this subject, and I have said to lots of women, look, this doesn't matter if you're pro-choice or pro-life. Just for a moment, imagine the hypocrisy of right to see an ultrasound of her unborn child before she chooses to have an abortion or not. Hillary Clinton has lobbied against this, so have most of the Democrat Party, and yet using that same technology to determine how best to abort an unborn child so you can harvest their body parts. Think of the hypocrisy of that position. Think of the extremity of the position that the Democrat Party has, which is literally, it is not a life until it leaves the hospital. That, ladies and gentlemen, is disrespect and disregard for the potential of every human being. And finally, the final issue that I would point to, the argument, the fight we gotta have between conservatism and progressivism is demonstrated by this beautiful winery. This beautiful winery, why is it here? It's gorgeous. It's here because Bob decided he had to leave California. He had to leave California. California, a place where liberal ideology has been in control for decades. And what's the consequence? You may not know this, but the agriculture in California is being destroyed in front of our eyes because a bunch of environmentalists and left-wing politicians have decided that they control the water. They decide that fish are more important than families. Literally, the agriculture in California is being destroyed as we speak. In California, the bastion of liberal ideology, the state that started the ideology that the EPA nationally now rolls out across the country. What's going on in California? California is now home to 111 billionaires, good for them, and the highest poverty rates in the nation. The exodus of the middle class, the exodus of young families, more people per capita on some form of welfare than any other state in the nation, the worst performance of education in the nation despite spending more money than virtually all states in the nation. It is an example of the failure of progressive policies to treat individuals with dignity and respect and give them an opportunity to move forward in their lives. There are many fights we have to have in 2016, but that is one of them. As I campaign, I have people come up to me all the time and say, thank you for answering questions. Thank you for speaking clearly. Thank you for talking common sense. And I was really, of course, gratified by those comments, but then I started to think about it. And I thought, you know, what a low bar, actually. What a low bar. When people are surprised that a presidential candidate actually answers a question, speaks plainly, and talks common sense. Ours was intended to be a citizen government. It is what by, for, and of the people means. And somehow we have gotten used to this idea in the last 40 or 50 years that only professional politicians can run for office. I don't think it's working real well for us. In fact, you know, you were talking about the Golden Dome sucking common sense out of people's heads. That goes on in the big dome in Washington, D.C. too. And 80% of the American people now believe that we have a professional political class of both parties that is more concerned with the preservation of its power, privilege, and position than on getting any work done. I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. How long has the border been insecure? 25 years. How long have we had sanctuary cities? Two issues we've been talking a lot about that. 15 years. How long has the Veterans Administration been a stain on our nation's honor? At least 2 decades. And remember a year ago when the Arizona wait time scandal hit and all these politicians took to Capitol Hill and they gave impassioned speeches and they held hearings and they passed a law. And the law, by the way, said you could fire the top 400 senior executives at the VA. Good, a breakthrough. We should do it all throughout the federal government. Only one's been fired, but what happened? They all, moved on. And just 5 days ago, we learned that over 250,000 veterans have died while waiting for some bureaucrat to tell them they could get care. This is not the America that we should be in the 21st century. So before I tell you a little bit about what I think needs to happen, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, and I won't go on too long because I'd love to take your questions as well. When I was a little girl, this won't take too long, but it's important in how I think about this challenge. When I was a little girl, my mother said to me on a Sunday morning, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." I didn't feel particularly gifted as a little girl or as a young woman. I would go on to graduate from college in the middle of a deep recession, try law school for a while, hate it and quit, and go back to work full-time, doing what I had done part-time to help put myself through college. I was a secretary. I typed, I filed, I answered the phones for a little 9-person real estate firm. Sometimes people ask me, how did I go from being a secretary to being the CEO? And the truth is, I didn't have a plan. But what I found out is that I liked challenge and I would run to problems. And every time I ran to a problem, I would find people who knew the answer to the problem. It's just they'd never been asked. And all throughout my life, whether it's in business, going from secretary to CEO, or chairing 2 major charities in this country, or advising the CIA or the Department of Defense or the Department of State or the Department of Homeland Security, or traveling and living and working all over the world and doing business and charity work and policy work all over the world, I have learned this. Everybody has God-given gifts. Everybody has potential. Everybody, regardless of their circumstances, wants to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning, truly. Not everybody has that chance. And I've often thought, as I have lived and traveled and worked around the world, why is this nation so different? Because I am keenly aware that it's only here that a young woman can start out as a secretary, go on to become the chief executive officer of the largest technology company in the world, and run for the presidency of the United States. That's only possible in this country. And the question is why? Why is that only possible here? Because people have God-given gifts all over the world. I think it's possible here because our founders knew what my mother told me. Our founders knew everybody has God-given gifts. Our founders knew everybody has potential. I know most people have far more potential than they realize, but our founders built this nation on what was a visionary idea. And the idea was that here you had the right to fulfill your potential. That's what they meant when they said the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And here was the radical part. They said that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness came from God and cannot be taken away by man or government. Ladies and gentlemen, I am running for the presidency of the United States because I think the data is clear. I think we know what's going on. I think you know what's going on. The truth of the matter is we have come to a place in this nation where the potential of this nation, where the potential of the people in this nation is being crushed by the weight, the power, the complexity, the cost, the ineptitude, and the creeping corruption of the federal government of this nation. And we can't just stand by and let it happen anymore. Think about it. Every government agency has gotten bigger and bigger for 50 years. We have had festering problems forever. People give great big speeches about the need for bipartisan tax reform, but guess what? We have a 70,000-page tax code. Have you ever heard of a single regulation that matters ever being repealed? Have you ever heard of an agency shrinking? Have you ever seen an opportunity where some government agency's power was taken away from them? I can't name one. By the way, there is one exception that proves the rule, and a person in Iowa told me. Said, yes, there was one regulation that was repealed one time. I said, what? Ronald Reagan repealed the 55-mile-an-hour national speed. There you go. exception that proves the rule. But the point is, it's going on and on and on. And meanwhile, the professional political class goes along to get along. Think about it. We are now tangling people's lives up in webs of dependence. I know a lot of people who are tangled up in lives that are dependent. And we don't encourage those people to move forward in their lives. We discourage them from doing so, actually. You talk to a single mom with 2 kids who's on several government programs, we're not encouraging her to move forward. We're discouraging her. Think about the fact that the engine of economic growth in this nation has always been family-owned businesses, small businesses, community-based businesses, startup businesses. They create 2/3 of the jobs. They employ half the people. Most people start out the way I did, in a little company, a 9-person real estate firm. My husband Frank started out as a tow truck driver in a family-owned auto body shop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's how most people start. Businesses like this winery create 2/3 of the new jobs, employ half the people, and yet we are crushing the engine of economic growth in this nation. Crushing is not too strong a term. Crony capitalism is alive and well, ladies and gentlemen, because if you have a big, powerful government, only the big can survive. So the big are getting bigger and the small are getting crushed. We are now destroying more businesses than we are creating for the first time in U.S. history. We're destroying more businesses than we are creating. The government gets involved in the financial sector. They haven't reformed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, not at all. But 10 banks too big to fail have become 5, and thousands of community banks have gone out of business. We can go on and on and on. I won't, because you get the point. But here is what I think this election is also about. I started by saying I think this election is really about what is the difference, what is the core difference between conservatism and progressivism, or the left wing of the Democrat Party. And I think the core difference is the respect with which we hold each life and each person. The hope that we instill in someone's potential. And I think the other fight we're going to have is, do we stop this growth of out-of-control government and return to a citizen government? And I think one of the other fights, therefore, is between managers and leaders. Let me tell you what managers are. Managers, whether in politics or in business, managers are people who do the best they can within the existing system. Managers are people who operate within the status quo. They go along to get along. But you know what? That's not leadership. Leaders challenge the status quo. And I think we need a leader now who will challenge the status quo of Washington and unlock the potential of this nation. I am reminded of something that Lady Margaret Thatcher said, a woman I admired greatly. She said, "I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation." Ladies and gentlemen, we have been managing the decline of a great nation for too long. And it is time now, leaders and citizens together, to lead the resurgence of a great nation. I believe that the citizens of this country know what has to be done. I believe that if I went into the Oval Office, which I will do on a regular basis, and said to the American people, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about how to solve some of these vexing, festering problems. Please take out your smartphones. I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think we should be able to fire senior executives in the federal government who don't do their jobs? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. This technology exists. Why don't we use it? I'd like to ask the American people, do you think we actually should know where every dollar of your money is being spent, so that we can prioritize it, so that we can invest in the things that we need more of, and stop doing the things that the federal government has no business doing? In other words, should we have some version of zero-based budget, where every agency has to defend every single program every single year? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Citizens know what needs to be done. Do you think we should repeal all of the EPA rules that are now crushing so many communities and industries in this country? And of course, nowhere is leadership more necessary than in the world today, because the world is a very dangerous and a very tragic place when America is not leading. The truth is, I know more world leaders on the stage today than anyone left, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton. But I didn't do photo ops. I had meetings. I've had a private meeting with Vladimir Putin, with King Abdullah of Jordan, with the Saudi royal family, with three Chinese leaders. You name a continent, you name a country, I've had meetings. Angela Merkel, David Cameron, you name them. So I know that when we do not stand with our allies and we do not confront our adversaries, the world is a very dangerous place. Secretary of State Clinton, as well as President Obama, has a habit of rewarding bad behavior. They've rewarded bad behavior of Vladimir Putin. They've rewarded Cuba's bad behavior. They've rewarded Iran's bad behavior. They've rewarded Syria's bad behavior. Guess what happens when you reward bad behavior? You get more of it. And that is what we see going on in the world. So I must say, on day one in the Oval Office, I would make 2 phone calls on day one. The first one would be to my good friend Bibi Netanyahu, to reassure him that this nation will always stand with the state of Israel. But as important as that phone call is, it's also a signal to every ally we have, because trust me, every ally we have, including our Arab allies who do not always agree with Israel, are watching how we treat Israel. And they conclude, wow, the United States of America is prepared to treat Israel this way, then my friendship doesn't mean very much. The second phone call I would make would be to the Supreme Leader of Iran. Realistically, he might not take my phone call, but he would get the message. And the message is this: I don't care what the deal is. I don't care what deal John Kerry signed or President Obama signed. New deal. Until and unless you open every military facility and every nuclear facility to full and unfettered inspections anytime, anywhere, really, we're going to cut off your access to the global financial payment system. It's called SWIFT. We can do that. We can do it without anyone's permission. We have to stop the money flow. And ladies and gentlemen, even if Congress manages to stop this deal, and I earnestly hope they stop it, the truth is everyone else has moved on. UN's moved on, thanks to our president ignoring the sovereignty of our nation. Europeans have moved on, China's moved on, Russia's moved on. China and Russia were never on our side of the table in this negotiation, ever. They've moved on, and the money's going to start to flow, so we have to cut the money off. I actually wouldn't call Vladimir Putin. We've talked to him way too much. But I would start rebuilding the Sixth Fleet immediately. I would start rebuilding the missile defense program in Poland immediately. I would start conducting regular aggressive military exercises in the Baltic states. I would start moving troops in and out of Germany pretty visibly. And Putin would get the message. And so whatever other adversary we have, they'd say, the United States of America seems to be back in the leadership game. And with regard to ISIS, I would hold a Camp David summit immediately and talk to our Arab allies who know this is their fight. They know this is their fight. You know, the Jordanians are fighting ISIS on the ground as we speak. The Saudis are on the ground fighting ISIS. The Egyptians are on the ground fighting ISIS. The Kurds are on the ground fighting ISIS. And every single one of those nations that I just mentioned have asked us for very specific things. Bombs and materials, sheer intelligence, arms. We're doing none of it. Our allies will help us defeat this evil, but only if they sense leadership and resolve and support from the United States of America. Because when we do not lead, our allies lose courage, and our adversaries press forward. I'm going to draw this to a close. I probably talked too long, and I want to take your questions. But I do just want to say that I have gotten lots of interesting questions over the course of this campaign. And one of the more interesting questions I got was on a national television program one Saturday morning. I was asked whether a woman's hormones prevented her from serving in the Oval Office. So ladies, little test. Can you think of a single instance in which a man's judgment might have been clouded by hormones? Any at all. Even in the White House. Hillary Clinton cannot be president of these United States, but not because she's a woman. Hillary Clinton can't be president of these United States because she's clearly not trustworthy, because she lacks a track record of leadership, and because the policies she will pursue will further crush the potential of this nation and of the people of this nation. So I think a lot about what it takes to win this job. And I will tell you, to win this job, we better have a who will throw every punch we have at Hillary Clinton. I am a fighter. I will not falter, and I can do that. But we're also going to have somebody who can do the job, because the job needs doing now. This is a pivotal time in our nation's history. I truly believe this. And I think this is a perilous time for the future of this nation. We can turn this around. Every wound we have is self-inflicted. Every problem we have can be solved with the citizenship of the people of this great nation. But we are at a pivotal time. And so to do the job requires what? Somebody who understands how the economy actually works. Somebody who understands how the world works and who's in it and what the world needs from us. Someone who understands bureaucracies, because the federal government has become one giant, bloated, inept, corrupt bureaucracy. Somebody who understands technology, because technology is a weapon being used against us. And it is also a tool that can be used to re-engage people in the process of their government. Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. And finally, I think it takes somebody who understands leadership, what it is, what it takes. Leaders sometimes have to make tough calls in tough times with high stakes and prepared to be held to account. But the highest calling of leadership is not the acquisition of power or title or position or a big office. The highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. And now we need a leader who will unlock the potential of this great nation. So I must tell you, I think every day about what our nation can be, will be, if we do the right things and make the right choices. And so I think about two of our most powerful symbols of democracy, Lady Liberty and Lady Justice. Lady Liberty, think about her. She stands tall and strong, as America always must be. She's clear-eyed and resolute. She doesn't shield her eyes from the realities of the world. She faces outward into the world, which is the way America must always face, and she holds her torch very high, because she knows she's a beacon of hope in a really troubled world. And Lady Justice, who holds a sword by her side. And I think she is telling us that we need a fighter, a warrior, for the values and the principles that have made this nation great. She holds a scale on the other hand. With that scale, she is reminding us, all of us are equal in the eyes of God. Each of us has God-given gifts, and so all of us must be equal in the eyes of government as well, powerful and powerless alike. And right now, the scale is tilted towards the wealthy, the powerful, the big, the well-connected, and tilted against the small, the startup, the family, and the powerless. And finally, she wears a blindfold. And I think with that blindfold, she is saying something we as conservatives have always believed. It doesn't matter who you are in this nation. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what your circumstances. It doesn't matter how you start. Here in this nation, every American's life now in this century must be filled with the possibilities that come from each of our God-given gifts, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.